Welcome to lesson 4. We're going to dive into the areas rollout parameters with the forest pack. First thing is first, let's select forest pack. We are going to select our object, modify our panel. Let's go underneath library, right underneath geometry. Click library and let's choose Daisy01 detail and load selected. Say yes, give it a couple of seconds to load. And now that we have that, so what we're going to discuss in this lesson is this tab right here called areas. Now the first thing that we need to know is that underneath areas, this is where your spline areas will be presented. If it is a solid object such as a plane or a box or anything that is solid, it'll be displayed underneath surfaces. So if I quickly open up surfaces, there's nothing over there. We'll dive into that when we get there. For now, let's concentrate on rectangle. As I select rectangle, we've got all these options over here, which we'll dive through. Let's first see the properties. Number one is obviously the name, so we can obviously write anything that we want. We can call it test. It obviously labels it up there. Next is the on and off button, which obviously switches it on and off, which is fine. Underneath the name, we have include and exclude. Now, if I select exclude, everything disappears, and that is because we are excluding everything from itself, which really doesn't make sense. So what we need to do is have more than one object. So let's leave it on include, and just for now I would like you to select this button over here. This button here is called add spline area. So this will add an include or an exclude area defined by the spline that you select. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say add spline area, and then I can select any spline that I want. So as an example, if I click on this one, it will immediately adopt the settings obviously that we selected underneath geometry. I can add another one right over there and click, so it immediately adds it in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select line 001 and I'm going to press this button here, which will remove it. Now that we have two splines in our area right over here, what I can do now is actually start selecting which one I want to include versus the exclude. Always important to know that each of these objects will have its own set of parameters. Also, hierarchy here is very, very important. Just like if you're using a program such as Photoshop or anything that needs hierarchy, the one at the very, very bottom is the base model. Anything above it will obviously be affected. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the rectangle, and right over there I'm going to choose exclude. Now the first thing obviously is that the forest pack disappears, and that is because if we select this rectangle now, have a look what happens. As I drag it right through, we are now excluding whatever the rectangle touches. The great thing about this as well is that it does not matter the height, which is fantastic. Okay, back to the top view. Let's move that aside, go back into the forest pack. So that is the exclude and include. And remember what I mentioned, it is all about the hierarchy. For example, if I take this rectangle and I select this button here, which will move that object downwards. Now all of a sudden we are taking the rectangle, which is the exclude, and the test spline that I did, which is the include. Now if I take the rectangle and I drag it across, nothing's going to happen because that was the exclude one. So just remember, hierarchy, very, very important. So for now, let's take the rectangle and let's delete it. Underneath that, we have the spline, and it is telling us the spline that we have. If we want to exchange it, we can activate rectangle and simply just select the next spline that we want, and it immediately adopts all the parameters that we just chose. Underneath that is thickness. Now at first this does absolutely nothing, and that is because the thickness is all determined if the spline is open. So for example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this spline right over there, highlighting line 001, which is the shape right over here. I'm going to say thickness increase, and as you can see, what I'm doing is that I'm increasing the thickness of the forest pack. Now this is useful because we don't have to make the spline itself thicker in order to actually make the forest pack object thicker. So that's where the thickness comes in. The force open spline button is when we have a closed spline object, such as this rectangle over here, and we want to force it to become open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another rectangle right over there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this rectangle. I'm going to place it right inside here, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to exclude it again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this, let's choose the rectangle, let's choose exclude, top view. So what I want now is to force this rectangle to be an open spline. We know it's a closed spline. I want to force it to be open, and as I do that, one of the sides becomes open. And now the thickness is almost like a fall off, allowing me to manipulate the amount of exclude area that it's happening. Untick that. Convert to paint, we're going to tackle in a little bit later. It's this button right over there. So well, for now, just ignore what this one can do for us. I'm going to remove the rectangle and the line just for now. Next, we can say select models, and we can pick the models that we want to see in the actual forest pack. So activate select models, click the pick. It shows you all of the models that we have inside this forest pack preset. Let's click cancel for now. Perspective mode, let me grab a render quickly, and then we can select the models we want. What I'm going to do is I'm only going to select the daisy models and click the OK button. So what's going to happen is it will only select the daisies. All the other models are going to basically be hidden from the actual render. Let's deselect that. Stop the render. The surface material ID is another way of selecting the models based on the IDs of all of the models. The Z offset allows you to lift the forest pack directly off of the actual spline that you're busy using. Let's put that back at 0. Distribution map. Now, the distribution map is a way to control where you do and do not want to see the actual forest pack. This is really great if you have a specific pattern that you want to show. For example, let's go to the top view. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into material editor, and I've already created a checkerboard material. Now, it's important to know that distribution maps work on the scale of 0 to 1, which is pure white to pure black, and then you'll have all of the grays in between. So a white pixel will scatter an object, whereas the black pixel will not. Now, in between all of the grays, we will be able to control that with fall-offs. For now, what I'm going to do is I want to grab this simple checkerboard material that I created. I'm going to click and drag it into the distribution map, click instance, and say OK, and immediately you can see that it's basically followed the actual checkerboard material, which is really awesome. Underneath that, we have the scale. I can pump this up to 200%, and you can see all it's doing is just increasing the size of the map. So if I go smaller, obviously it'll be a lot smaller. The threshold is all of the pixels that are not pure white or pure black. I've got another bitmap here that I created. If we view image, it's very simple. You got your pure whites, your pure black, and then in between we got all the different variations. So I'm going to swap this out, click and drag right inside there, say instance. Let's change this to a bit smaller. Now you can see that it's clear cut over there, meaning where it is black you will not see any of the vegetation, where it's white you will see the scattering. The threshold, as mentioned earlier, is where we'll be able to control that. For example, if I put this at 50, you can slowly see that we are slowly closing in on the actual circle. If we go higher, you can see I'm getting bigger and bigger away from the pure black into the white. Next on the list is the fall off effect. It's all grayed out, and that is because we need to actually activate the fall off global props over here. So as I activate density, you'll see that all of this does actually become available. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click and say clear for the distribution map. So as I activate the density, what this is going to allow me to do is remove all of the vegetation around the border of the actual object. So in this instance we chose the rectangle, so the higher this number goes, the more I'm going to reduce from the actual edges over there, helping us reduce everything from the actual edges of whatever area that we have chosen. If we choose a little bit further up, we have an invert curve that will invert the effect, meaning everything from the inside will actually start being reduced. So let's choose invert and let's start increasing this amount, and you can see exactly the opposite effect is busy happening here. Now, if we change the density percentage over here, what this is telling us, because this is linked to this, if for example I choose 1000 millimeters here and the density is 100%, I'm using 1000 millimeters. If I come here and choose 50%, then I'm only using 50% of this value here. So this percentage and the scale percentage, which we'll discuss in a second, I just leave these at 100% and I worry about these values over here. Next we have the edit curve. This is where you can open up a curve editor. You can add in additional curves. You can move the curves. If you right click, you can make a Bezier smooth or corner, and obviously you can manipulate the density fall off a lot more. Underneath this we have exclude. Now let's put this back at 0. If I increase this, nothing's happening, and that is because we need an exclude item. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this rectangle right over here, and we're going to add it to this forest pack as an exclude item. So let's add the item, choose the spline, make sure we choose exclude, and remember to put it right inside the object, which is just like that. If we go into the forest pack now, we can play around with the exclude and the include, because as you can see, the exclude is coming directly from wherever that object is, and if we choose the include, it'll now go from the edges of the border, giving you a lot more control and flexibility on what you can do. If I untick density and tick scale, the scale button is now active. Now this scale again is linked to this number. So where the scaling works really well is the following. Let's go into another example which I have prepared already. So let's grab this Forest Pack Pro. We're going to scroll down and we're going to activate the density and the scale. Now what this is going to say is the following. This is the border that we have chosen where the Forest Pack items are. I would like for any object within a certain radius of the border to scale downwards. So for example, anything within 2 meters of that border, I'd like it to start scaling down, and as you can see, the scale has already started happening, and that is controlled via the curve. For example, if I choose this and go a bit higher, you can see I'm increasing the scale of the objects. If I want them to be really small towards the end, I can easily just grab my curve and pull this all the way down. So this really helps if you've got a slope, or if you've just got a lot of vegetation and you want the vegetation to be a lot smaller towards the edge of your actual border. This is how you do it. And then again, you can obviously play around by adding extra points and changing the curve. The exclude is exactly the same. We'd need an exclude object, and then you can start playing around with the exclude. If we do affect height only, that is going to distort it, because then only the height will be adjusted, and as you can see, that just looks a really bit odd. So unticking that, especially with vegetation, will keep the proportion intact. Scrolling a bit further up, we've got the boundary checking. Now this is really great. Let's grab this forest pack. Let's actually delete it and start a new one from scratch. Okay, let's take one step back quickly. How does Forest Pack actually do what it does? What happens is when you choose a preset, it automatically imports the models from the preset that you've used. Then it'll use those items to create the scatter. Now, if you go underneath Scene Explorer, you'll always see that there is a forest_templates. It's in italic, meaning that it is frozen. So let's hide this layer and unhide this layer. You will see immediately that all of these objects are the items or the objects that you are using to scatter. So Forest Pack finds the models, imports the models, then uses those models to scatter obviously around your surface area. Now this is important to understand, because in situations like this, if the model is in a round shape just like this, so this is a lot of blades of grass, it is round, which means that if you're trying to go through a very straight line or even a corner, there's going to be overlapping, and items such as this one will go through your border, over your border, and bleed out. So there is a solution to fix this. Let's unhide everything, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide the Forest Pack template because we don't really need those. Right over here, I've got a very simple layout. What I have is just a ground right over there. I created a border just like that, and this is going to be my scattering area. So let's go into the top view quickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a forest pack. Grab a forest pack, let us choose this over here, say yes. I'd like to go into the geometry layout, and what we're going to do is we're going to select one that we haven't used before. We are going to choose cut grass field 01 large. click load selected, say yes, give it a few seconds, let it load, and then what we're going to do is we're actually going to load up a render. Now immediately you can see that it's gone right over our boundary. Now remember, this is the line that I created and this is the floor. The boundary is this here. This is our surface. So we don't want the grass to cut over this, and certainly not through the actual border that I created. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a render. So let's shoot up a render quickly. And what I'm going to do is going to start this render right over here and have a look at what this render is going to look like. Now immediately it's very untidy. So you can see that everything is bleeding right over and through this actual border. So the first option that is being used is called point. This uses the pivot point of the actual item, which means, if I can show you with an example, the following. I've got this item right here. Now the pivot point is in the center of this item. If I were to place this right over there, this would be perfect. It would render. The very minute that the pivot point leaves the surface area, so our scattering surface area, then and only then would the item be deleted. So we can get overlapping like this. The next option we have is called size. Now the size works on the actual physical size of the object as well as the actual collision of the actual object. So what that means is if we go underneath here and we choose size, so let's grab this render quickly, let's zoom out, have a look at the difference that's going to happen. Let's activate the size mode. Now there's a huge difference. The biggest difference is that there are huge gaps here. Now why is that? If we use this as an example again, right now there is our border. This is the best case scenario that we will get because this is the collision. If the object passes through our surface area, which is the sky over here, or of course even this side, it will get deleted, which is why we are getting all of these gaps over here, for example, because the item got deleted. The neatest and cleanest method is the edge mode. The edge mode uses the lowest Z vertex of each of the item's individual element to see if they are outside the scattering area. So basically what that's saying is it's going to look at every single model, every blade of grass, every leaf that is its own element. If that passes past the actual scattering area, it will get deleted, which means if the item was like this, it will get deleted. This piece here would get deleted, which means this would remain. So that means we're going to get a very neat and very clean forest pack. So let's go into our forest pack mode and let's activate the edge mode. And as you can see, the viewport does not reflect that, so just remember that. Have a look at the render. It's nice, clean, and very, very neat. And if we go into perspective mode, and again remember, the viewport is not showing the update to conserve resources, but if we zoom in, you can see how perfect, nice, and neat your grass is now kept. And finally, last is the projection axis UV mode, which we'll discuss in another lesson. For now, that is it. In the next lesson, we'll start discussing all these extra options here, and we'll finish off the areas tab.